In this podcast, two Gen Xers are taking a trip down memory lane, revisiting and reflecting on the cinema of the 1980s. We'll look at the hits and the flops, the studio blockbusters and art house indies, the critically acclaimed, and the universally reviled. The series is hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli, a writer and librarian, and features Dustin Morrow, a filmmaker, author, and professor of film. So pull on your leg warmers, crank up your boombox, and hop in the DeLorean. It's time for The Long Rewind. Welcome to The Long Rewind. I'm your host, Lisa, and with me as always is Dustin.
Morrow. Dustin Morrow.
And that's a little clue as to what today's episode is about. Today we're talking about the Bond films of the 1980s. That's James Bond. Yeah. That's right. This was a pretty big decade for James Bond.
It was.
Was it
there
not?
were 5 Bonds in the 80s. There was one literally every other year, 81, 83, 85, 87, and 89. So it was a prolific era for the world's favorite super spy.
Yeah.
Started with Roger Moore for the first 3, finished with Timothy Dalton.
Those were the James Bonds
the
of
latter
the,
two.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was a real period of kind of evolution and change for Bond and a real interesting period because, as we know, Bond has always been, as such a long-running franchise, a franchise stretching from the 60s all the way up to present day, that it's always responding to what's going on in the world, culturally and politically, and that was very true in the 80s, and so that's what we'll be discussing today.
Yeah, it is so interesting how James Bond really does reflect its times and trends and, in all sorts of interesting ways. So
before we jump in, just what's your Bond origin story? How did you come to Bond? What was your first James Bond movie that you remember seeing? How did you see it, and what did you think?
Well, it's a funny story. I think the first Bond film I ever saw, and to be honest, I didn't really see the whole thing, and you'll understand why in a minute. I think my parents threw us in the back of the car and went to the drive-in to see The Living Daylights in 1987. Mm-hmm. I remember sort of seeing it, right? I was pretty young. I was not quite 10 at that time, so I was like 9. So I was probably not awake for the whole thing. I remember being in our pajamas in the back of the car and, here we were watching this movie. So I remember seeing little bits of it. And that's my first memory of seeing Bond at a drive-in with my parents. And then after that, it's...
And your dad is a Bond fan,
Yes, my dad's
right?
a big Bond fan, has been for a long time. And I knew that. I've known that for a long time. And I guess I saw him watching some Bond at home, too. There's the one with Diana Rigg, and I can't remember which one that is.
That's the George Lazenby one.
Right. What is that, On Her Majesty's Secret Service?
On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
So I remember him watching that at home on our TV. So I don't know that I really started actively watching them until, I watched, I think the Timothy Dalton ones. And then I definitely, after that, I think I saw them all or most of them in the theater after that. So, and then it took me a while to start to see a lot of the older ones. Just because when I was young, it was a little bit harder to get some of that stuff in terms of rentals or whatever. I just didn't have the money or the access to that stuff. And I didn't have cable, so I didn't see the older ones till later. But I've become a fan of some of the older ones now, too. So, I particularly like From Russia with Love quite a lot. So, yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your origin story question?
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. What about you?
Well, as I've spoken on this podcast in the past about how my father owned a small town drugstore, and in that town, that drugstore was we were the first people to rent videos at kind of the dawn of the video rental era, before there was even such a thing really as video stores.
Yeah.
My dad's store had a kind of video counter, and it had a bunch of shelves with videotapes, and those tapes cycled in and out. There was a company that would come and replace them, bring new releases, and then take some of the older movies away. It was kind of almost like a subscription service.
Yeah.
But there was a core group of 100 tapes that were always there.
Yep.
And one of those tapes was Octopussy. And so that was my memory is that's my first Bond, because I used to get that tape from my dad's store all the time and watch it incessantly. It's definitely the movie I've seen the most of all the Bond movies. And then I taped, View to a Kill off of TV, and I got started to get some of the older movies from like HBO and stuff, and get into some of the Connerys. But I didn't see any in the theater until Goldeneye, Pierce Brosnan's first movie. I didn't see either of the Daltons in the theater.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of my Bond origin story. I was into it. I wasn't like a diehard fan. I didn't love it like I loved like Superman.
Sure.
But I really liked him, and I'm definitely like a lot of Gen Xers. I think I'm a Roger Moore kid for sure. Like he's my Bond. By a huge margin. He's my favorite Bond. And we can talk about him today since he did 3 of these movies.
Yeah, he did 3 of the 5, right?
Yeah, I think the best Bond is The Spy Who Loved Me. I think that's the peak of Bond movies, period.
And that's also Roger Moore?
Yeah, that's
right?
Roger Moore. It's like his, let's see, is it his second? Yeah, I think it's his second. He did Live or Let Die, Spy Who Loved Me, Man with a Golden Gun, Moonraker, and then the 3 that we're talking about today. So yeah, I think it was his second.
And that was from the 70s,
yeah,
right?
It's from the 70s. I think it just has it has everything that I want out of a Bond movie, which is like decadent art direction.
Very much.
Like bordering on campy villains and henchmen. That's the that's the movie that introduces Jaws.
Yeah.
Like just crazy action set pieces, like a real tongue-in-cheek sense of humor. And it was Roger Moore before he got, like a lot of people will argue, like kind of long in the tooth for this part. He was still kind of a young, virile guy as in that sort of mid-70s Bond. Also has one of the great Bond girls, Barbara Bach is the Bond girl. I just love it. It's the movie that Austin Powers spoofs the most.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, like the most of the sort of direct jokes where Austin Powers is sort of directly referencing something specific from Bond. Most of those come out of The Spy Who Loved Me.
Right.
And I think that tells you something about kind of how much of the core iconography of Bond is sort of like peaks in that movie. And a lot of people will disagree with me about that. I'm sure people that are younger than us, people younger than Gen X are going to swear by Daniel Craig. Some of them might even, I've heard some of them on various podcasts swear by Pierce Brosnan, which is befuddling to me. But and then anyone older than us is going to be Connery. And a lot of people our age are Connery too. And I get that. I get why Connery is considered by many, probably if you did a complete survey of every Bond fan of all ages, like Connery probably wins, and I understand why. But Moore's the guy for me. I like the humor that he brings to the part that Connery doesn't.
He's very wry.
There's like a twinkle in his eye. There's a sense that
he
doesn't seem as dangerous as Connery does in the part. And so I understand, like, if you're looking to Bond for kind of straight, hard action and kind of espionage, that Connery's your guy instead of Moore. But for me personally, when I put on a Bond, I'm looking for like escapism and fun. And so I want some real humor. I want a Bond that has like a twinkle in his eye, a Bond that kind of seems like he's in on the joke. Not that Connery wasn't, but like
he just seemed like more dangerous.
Yeah, there's a levity in Roger Moore that I like, that kind of says to me as a Bond fan, like, isn't this all kind of silly? And I think it is, because I think Bond is kind of silly. And I enjoy that.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the interesting thing about Bond, right? It almost flip-flops back and forth between sort of serious and sort of silly in terms of the actual Bonds themselves and how their tenure plays out in terms of the films, right? You get Connery, then you get Moore. So you get Connery, it's maybe a little more serious, and then you get Moore, who's it's a little bit more tongue in cheek. Dalton is a little more serious, and then you get Brosnan, which I think is considered a little more tongue in cheek. I mean, I've seen those all, but I think I know them the least.
Yeah, they're kind of campy.
They're a little more campy. And Craig obviously.
I mean,
not.
that's the thing about having a character with this kind of longevity. I mean, there aren't very many of them besides the superheroes, right? But you can see kind of analogs with the superheroes, like Batman.
Yeah.
It's okay to love every edition of that, or rendition, I should say, of that character. Like, I love the old Adam West show. Of
course, yeah, me too.
But to me, it's like almost a completely different character from like the Christian Bale movies or even Michael Keaton.
Yeah.
And you can like them both. Like the Dark Knight movie, the Nolan movies are great. I mean, I would rather watch the Tim Burton movie any day over the Nolan movies, but they're just so wildly different.
It's more like, what are you in the mood for?
Yeah,
in a
exactly.
way, right?
And Bond is like that too. It's hard to even kind of compare mid-'80s Roger Moore when he was at the kind of the height of its sort of ridiculousness, the Bond franchise, to the stuff that Daniel Craig's doing, which is pretty, by most accounts, kind of pretty deadly serious.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you think each era kind of gets the Bond it deserves, so to speak? I mean, maybe not deserves, but
it's a weird way to put it, because it's like, you got this Bond coming.
And I don't mean it that way. I think it's more like you just get the Bond that makes sense for your era, because it's echoing the era, right?
Yeah,
it's
which is,
it.
The idea behind this episode is sort of like to see whether we can crack, at least on some level, what Bond was up to in the 80s and what that says about the 80s.
Yeah.
Because Bond is, as we said, it's kind of a reflection of
the times.
Reflection of the times, right? So just a few thoughts. Like there's some big things that were happening in 80s Bond. One is that there was a kind of a decided tonal shift, and this was based on the decision of the Broccolis, who are the producing family that controls the Bond franchise to this day.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of criticism at the end of the 70s with Moonraker, which is considered by many to be the goofiest Bond movie. It's the one where Bond goes to space. I happen to love it, but again, I've now established what I like in a Bond movie, and so take that for what it's worth. But I think Moonraker is like crazy fun. But there was a lot of criticism of it, even though it was a big hit, like most Bond movies, that Bond had gone too far into like the silly camp area. And so there was a concentrated effort from the producers to kind of ground him a little bit and make a slightly darker, edgier, and more realistic and kind of espionage-focused Bond movie. And so that's essentially what they thought For Your Eyes Only was, and which is funny because For Your Eyes Only is a pretty ridiculous movie. It's the first 80s Bond movie. It's 81.
1981.
But compared to Moonraker, it is the Dark Knight, right? It's just because Moonraker is so crazy.
Right.
But it's funny that like the narrative around For Your Eyes Only, and we'll get into it when we start talking about each film, but that narrative around that movie is that it's kind of like a more serious and edgy Bond because it's still really extremely goofy.
Well, and especially when you compare it to the actual more serious, or the even more serious, I should say, and edgy Bonds. It's definitely nowhere near that. Yeah.
And then when they went to Octopussy and View to a Kill, the second and third movie from the 80s, it's kind of like I don't find those movies to be tremendously more goofy than For Your Eyes Only, because as I said, I don't think For Your Eyes Only is all that serious a movie, but they are goofier. Like it's sort of like they were like, well, this is what the Bond movies are with Roger Moore, and until Roger Moore's gone, like this is the kind of Bond movie we're going to make, because they said the exact same thing in the latter half of the 80s that they did coming out of Moonraker, which was coming out of Octopussy and View to a Kill. They were like, well, now we have to have a darker, grittier Bond, and so, or at least a more serious Bond, and so that's how you get Timothy Dalton, who's a Shakespearean actor, and who wasn't supposed to have the part. Of course, the famous story about this is that the part was offered to Pierce Brosnan and he accepted it, but he was waiting for notice from I can't remember which network it is, ABC, I think.
Yeah, I don't know.
Whoever had Remington Steele, his TV series, which was on the verge of being canceled, and he thought was going to be canceled, and he was told was basically being canceled. But they hadn't actually officially canceled it, and so they had 2 weeks left to renew it when he took the Bond part. And as soon as he took the Bond part, they went, "Oh my God, like we have James Bond on our network roster, and we're about to let him go."
Right.
So they put in an order for a half season of that show, and it continued its downward slide and was gone in half a season.
Oh, geez.
And so that's why he lost the part. And they brought in Timothy Dalton at the last minute. They looked at like Sam Neill and some other famous actors, but went with Dalton, who was semi-unknown at the time. He had done supporting parts in like a few kind of costume dramas like The Lion in Winter. And of course I knew him from Flash Gordon. He's the prince in Flash Gordon. And so I knew exactly who he was when they cast him. But most people didn't. He's just considered kind of a serious British stage actor. And, his idea and the idea of the Broccolis at the time was, we're going to make a more serious movie. Again, it's a little funny because, compared to the stuff they're making today, Living Daylights is still fairly goofy. They slide down a mountain in a cello case.
It's probably the thing I remember the best from that
so
movie.
It's still pretty silly. But then they went even darker in License to Kill, Dalton's second movie, which is where Bond kind of goes rogue and sort of sets out on a mission of revenge and kind of vigilantism, and goes after this drug lord in the Caribbean. And it is a pretty dark, style. Pretty violent movie. It kind of looks and feels like an episode of Miami Vice. I always think of it as the Miami Vice Bond.
It definitely feels that way. Yeah.
And I didn't like it when I was young, and you and I watched it within the last 6 months or so, and I thought it was a lot better than I remembered it, mostly because I liked Dalton, but it actually has some good action sequences and stuff. The villain is still not great, and it's still definitely lesser Bond, I think, but you can see what they were trying to do, and it's another thing worth noting that Bond has always been. This is not so true at the beginning, but definitely once it got going, was kind of more of a follower than a trailblazer. It was reflective of what was going on and not setting new ground. That continues even to this day, but certainly Miami Vice was huge. Moonraker was only made because Star Wars came out in 1977.
Right.
And even today, the Daniel Craig Bonds, and I'll probably get some hate mail for saying this, but it's true, are a response to the Bourne movies. They have they have a lot of jerky Paul Greengrass style camera work. They have these kind of close in action sequences and these almost parkour like
it actually has parkour
scenes.
In one of them.
Yeah,
at least
that's all Bourne Identity, the Bourne stuff.
Yeah.
So
another spy franchise in a way. And that's just kind of how action movies of that ilk have become, or at least for a while they were that. So it makes sense. I do want to stick up a little for Timothy Dalton. I know he's not a lot of people's favorite, but I have a lot of affection for him because he was my first Bond. I didn't really know Roger Moore till later. So I always liked him. I always thought, to me, he was Bond because that's the first one I ever saw.
like him too. I think
he's a great actor too.
I would rank him fourth. I would go Moore, Connery, Craig, Dalton, and then Brosnan and Lazenby. But I think he's good. I think he's better than my giving him a fourth place ranking tells you, because I think he's actually a really good Bond.
Yeah, I think so too.
There's just not a lot of, and you can see what he's trying to do in those movies, but there's not a lot of humor in his Bond. And for me, humor is a very important part of Bond. And I miss it when I'm watching those films. But I like those films, especially Living Daylights, I think is actually a pretty good movie.
Yeah, I like it too. I mean, it was my first Bond. How could I not like it?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, we'll talk about this, but the Bond certainly always reflects and responds to the political landscape, and Cold War tensions were all that was being discussed in the 80s. And so there's a lot of like kind of Cold War reflective stuff.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of kind of response to advancements in technology. That was a big thing in the 80s. And kind of growing concerns about like global terrorism, sort of the rise of terrorists as a actual potential real life,
Yeah, definitely.
threat.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You saw that in a lot of like action movies in the 80s, like all these Chuck Norris movies, and Stallone and Schwarzenegger were always fighting terrorists where like 10, 15 years earlier, like that would not have really been a thing.
Yep.
Except in sort of very rare kind of like exploitation movies. So how should we do this? I mean, I thought one way to do this would be to make a game of this, and we could kind of roll through the sort of, what do you want to call them? The categories.
Aspects of Bond, the elements of Bond.
Yeah, the elements,
maybe? Yeah.
the recurring motifs, the recurring elements of Bond movies.
The things they all have to have, right? They're sort of the pieces that make Bond.
And I thought maybe we could just sort of like, we could crown an 80s Bond champ. Maybe that would be a way to like structure a discussion.
It's always so hard for me, but we'll do what we can.
Just by going category, like through category, and like we'll see who wins the most categories.
Okay.
So let's start with the plot.
Okay.
Which is always, I don't know about you, but it's always sort of the least interesting thing in any Bond movie to me, because they all kind of feel the same.
Yeah.
It's always some crazy megalomaniac who wants to control some kind of global market, or take over the world in some aspect, or detonate some kind of bomb, or I don't know. It's always like,
right. I mean, well, you think about Austin Powers again, right? That just shows you what they were, right? It was just some guy or person, or whoever who wanted to take over the world in some particular way. Sometimes Bonds can run together for me because I do have a hard time holding on to the plot, and I thought there was something wrong with me because of that, but now I realize the plots are almost beside the point with James Bond. It really is sort of about the elements and hanging out with James Bond, I think, and enjoying the sumptuousness of Bond than it is about the plot.
I also find a lot of the Bond movies to be semi-incoherent. I think telling the stories of their plots is actually the thing they often do least well. And I used to think that was like intentional, like it was like they overcomplicated the plots. But now I kind of like, I've come to realize, like, I think that's just not what they do well. That's just like not one of their strengths, just generally.
And I don't think it's why, for instance, I watch a James Bond movie, right? I mean, I don't know that I ever thought about why I watch a James Bond movie, but it's not for the plot.
When I've sat down and thought, like, I want to watch a Bond, like, I've never picked one based on
its plot.
The plot.
No.
Yeah. Sometimes based on the villain, not often.
Yeah, I can see that.
But never on what the villain is trying to do.
Right. You just kind of want to enjoy being in Bondland for a little while, I think. And
so I don't know. I don't know that we even need to go through the plots of each of them, because they're pretty. They're pretty dense, but like in a really dumb way.
There's always a MacGuffin. For sure.
Yeah. I mean, I will say the Bond as Charles Bronson, like fighting the drug lord thing, is a definite like fifth place for me out of the five
and
movies.
That's License to Kill, right? 1989. Yeah.
I like this might be because he's probably my favorite villain of this decade, but I love Christopher Walken's efforts to flood the Silicon Valley with a man-made earthquake.
Yeah.
So I guess that would be my choice for the winner in the plot category.
Yeah, so the plots we have it's For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, A View to a Kill, The Living Daylights, and License to Kill. And View to a Kill is the one with Max Zorin, a.k.a. Christopher Walken, wanting to flood Silicon Valley, which I think I have to agree with you here. The other plots are a little bit more forgettable too, I think.
Yeah.
In general, although some of the villains are great, like the Octopussy villain is pretty great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would agree. I think it's View to a Kill. Did you want to go over any of the other plots for points of interest, or okay?
No.
So it's really
it's
just
the least interesting thing to talk about. So let's move on to pre-credit sequences.
Oh, and those are so important.
Yeah.
I mean,
So For Your Eyes
yeah.
Only has Bond being imprisoned in a helicopter by Blofeld,
Mm-hmm.
and who is controlling the helicopter by remote control.
Yeah.
And Bond takes over the helicopter and then picks up Blofeld using the leg, whatever, I don't know what you call it, the landing gear of the helicopter,
yeah.
and then drops Blofeld into a like a giant pipe.
yeah, like one of those like big smokestack kind of things.
It's insane.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. And kind of funny,
Octopussy
honestly.
has this whole like little miniature movie where he's trying to destroy this missile launching site on a Latin American like island, and he gets caught, and then he's sprung by his accomplice, who's this beautiful woman, and then he gets in a one-man plane and leads
it's also kind of a
heat-seeking
car
missile into the barracks with the missile launcher and destroys it that way. It's quite a sequence.
It's amazing. There's some amazing stunts
Unbelievable
in that.
stunt work in it. Yeah. The use of that little one-man airplane is crazy.
You got to see it just for that, I think.
View to a Kill is one of the several Bond movies that starts with a skiing sequence. It's the one that famously has the really dumb moment where they start playing this kind of Beach Boys music. Is it Beach Boys? Or is
it's
it
a cover,
Beach
I think,
Boys?
but it's an actual Beach Boys song. I think it's a cover of
so Bond
California
Bond
Girls.
invents snowboarding, and I think I read that this is the first time snowboarding was shown on film.
Wow.
Did you ever think that the first snowboarder ever on film would be Roger Moore?
I mean, if I had thought about it, I probably wouldn't have thought.
It's meant to be him.
Right. I wouldn't have thought. I mean, I will say it's always great to see Bond in the snow, and it's a great sequence, but that California Girls moment does kind of
That brings it down. It's rough. It's rough. As I said, I like humor, but I prefer my humor to not be quite that dumb.
You like it winking, not whatever that was.
Was on the level of There's a moment in Moonraker where a pigeon does a double take. It's on that level of stupidity. It's sort of like, let's keep it under control. Your fans will forgive a certain amount of goofy humor, but let's not go over the top.
Let's not point at the goofy humor. I mean, what do you think that is? Those weird little moments. Where does that come
I have
from?
heard that those are Michael G. Wilson, who is married to one of the Broccolis, and so got himself a job kind of running the Bond franchise. And he co-wrote a lot of the Bonds.
Okay.
And apparently he has this kind of sense of humor and thinks that these things are hilarious.
I mean, they're not frequent, but they do really stick out like sore thumbs. I think it's kind of interesting.
There's an unbelievable stunt in... I want to say it's Man with the Golden Gun. I can't.
Okay.
I think that's what it is. Where there's a car that Bond is supposedly driving, and it does a kind of jump over a river, but while it does the jump, it does kind of a 180 in the air. So it's like a flip jump.
Crazy.
It's one of the coolest things you'd ever see anyone do with a car. Literally one of the coolest car stunts ever. And they put a slide whistle sound over it, and it's God.
Yeah, I've seen this.
And I think I heard that was all like Michael G. Wilson is doing.
Well, it's interesting to know where it comes from, because it's one of those things that you see it and you notice it for sure, but you're like, where in the... I mean, this doesn't map to most of the other things you see in Bond for the most part. So,
so Living Daylights is on the Rock of Gibraltar.
Okay, yep.
And there's like a training session that Bond is part of that it turns out to be real. Like they start killing the spies. And so he kind of jumps on a Land Rover and then, jumps on a cargo plane and then jumps off of that and lands on a boat with a hot lady and, does his thing.
That's not unusual for movies of this era. I mean, meaning Bond films of this era, the end of the pre-credit sequence. Yeah.
And License to Kill kind of sets up the story in a way. It's him and Felix Leiter, and they're chasing this drug lord in Florida, and they get him, and then they parachute into Leiter's wedding.
Right.
Which is then like after the credits is kind of massacred, and that's what sets him on his journey of revenge.
Yeah.
So I don't know, where does your vote go? I know where mine goes.
Yeah. I mean, looking at all of these, I would have to say Octopussy, I think.
Me too.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I mean, there's some silliness in it too, but boy, the stunts. Wow.
Yeah, to the degree that like these sequences operate as their own like little miniature films within the film, I think that one's the most successful. It has a great beginning, middle, and an end, complete with like a few twists in like 6 or 7 minutes.
That's true. I never really thought of it that way, but
and
they are
really great aerial stunt work.
Oh yeah, I mean incredible. But I also do like that snow intro. If you take away the Beach Boys song, so from View to a Kill.
Except that there are better snow intros.
That's true.
That's the thing. Is it also pales in comparison to, I think it's Spy Who Loved Me, where it has that stunt where the guy goes off of the cliff and then the Union Jack
You're
parachute
right. I think
comes
I often mix up the beginning of A View to a Kill with that intro. So
so we're on to song.
Okay.
So For Your Eyes Only by Sheena Easton.
Yeah.
Which, as you and I were discussing the other night when we were watching this movie, we think this is the only Bond where the artist appears in the opening credits.
I think that's true. As
like
far
you
as
actually
I know.
see Sheena Easton
singing,
which is wild.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting that it's the only
very
one.
Strange. Can you imagine like Skyfall and like he's down in the sand and the cards, and then Adele pops in?
I mean, I
so
can
weird.
imagine it. I don't. It might work if you did it right, but yeah, obviously it hasn't happened since then. So I don't know.
I think it would be so corny.
Yeah, it might be. I mean, we were talking about this. We were like, they're always trying things in Bond, right? They're always trying things to see if they work, and maybe this just didn't work for them. But yeah, she's there doing her thing.
And then Octopussy has, thankfully, not a song called Octopussy. Although, as Lisa could tell you, I was trying to imagine what that would be and was making up my own tunes.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
It's hard. It has All Time High by Rita Coolidge, which is an oft sort of mocked Bond theme. Whenever you see rankings of Bond themes, this one's always near the bottom. It's a very like sax heavy, mid-tempo AOR song. And I'll defend it to death just because I love Octopussy. And I actually like how John Barry takes the theme from the song and he actually really elegantly weaves it into
that's true. He does.
the score. And it works better as score than it does as a song, I will admit. But, my love of Octopussy means that I kind of actually like this song, even though I admit that it's really cheesy.
It's just not, I don't have a problem with it. I just don't find it, I like an exciting Bond song or something that's a little more stirring, and it's very low key. And you're right, it makes great score, I think, but it's a little too low key for me, but I don't otherwise have a problem with it. Yeah.
View to a Kill has Duran Duran's View to a Kill, which was a massive hit for them.
It's really fun.
Living Daylights had The Living Daylights by Aha, who famously did the song Take On Me. Living Daylights was probably their only other hit, I think. And License to Kill had Gladys Knight's License to Kill, which I...
Go ahead and tell the folks.
Well, obviously I knew she was saying License to Kill, but it was just like this sort of disjunctive thing in my head that I could not understand why she was singing it the way she was, because it sounds to me like she says License to Kilt, Kilt. And I knew, I think I knew. I don't know what I thought.
The way you explained it to me was not that you knew.
I was just like,
okay,
what is this? Like, why does she always say, she always goes, the license to kill.
But she does, that's not her. It's the singers after her.
You've explained this to me now. It's backup singers behind her going to kill. Yeah, they're repeating. But they come in right as she finishes the word kill.
Yeah.
And so the T from there saying
sounds
to
like
kill
kilt.
Makes it sound like she's saying kilt.
Right. I know if this were a Connery Bond, perhaps that would work.
Good
right?
point.
License
Nicely
to Kill.
done.
But no,
License
Timothy
to
Dalton
Haggis.
is not.
Yeah, sure.
But Timothy Dalton, I don't think is Scottish.
So where does your vote go? There's actually 3 really good new wave.
Yes.
That whole thing of like Bond reflecting the time, and the music does that too. And as a lover of 80s music and new wave music is my favorite kind of music by far.
Yes.
So like 3 of these songs are among my favorite Bond songs. And then, as I said, I often like the Octopussy one just for
I
sentimental reasons. But
respect your
I think
defense
For
of
Your
it.
Eyes Only is a great song. And I think
do too.
View to a Kill is an amazing song. And I
Yeah.
actually really like Living Daylights.
Yeah.
That's an underrated Bond song.
Yeah. I mean, are you asking me which my favorite is?
Yeah,
or-
where does your vote go?
Well, it is hard because I feel like The Living Daylights and View to a Kill are both kind of on a very similar par, and they're both really great
I don't think it's hard.
synth new wave, but I think View to a Kill is my favorite.
There's no way
out
it's
of all of
not
them.
View to a Kill. I think View to a Kill is my favorite Bond song, period.
It's so
Oh, no,
exciting.
that's not true.
It's like
it's
really
second after Spy Who Loved Me.
It's really exciting. It really gets you ready for action adventure. I don't know. I just think it's great.
Yeah, it's just a great new wave song.
But let me put in a vote too for License to Kill. I think Gladys's is a really nice song. I think she does a great job.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Not everybody thinks that, but I think it's it's dramatic, and I like a dramatic Bond song. So, but
right.
yeah, View to a Kill is my top.
Yeah.
No question.
Well, so far we're agreeing that we have no differences of opinion, which is good. So on to villains. For Your Eyes Only has Aristotle Cristados, which I thought sounded like a chip. Like I really wanted to get a bag of Cristados. Maybe because it looks like the word Tato is in the middle there.
Yeah.
Cristados.
Right.
Anyway, he's played by Julian Glover. He's a Greek smuggler. And he's trying to get this sort of code cracking device to sell the
ATAC
Soviets.
Device, yeah.
Octopus, he has Kamal Khan, which is another great name, played by the legendary Louis Jourdan from Gigi. View to a Kill has Max Zorin, played by the inimitable Christopher Walken.
Yes.
He's kind of an industrialist who wants to flood the Silicon Valley and take over the microchip market.
I mean, there was part of me that was kind of rooting for him this time.
Living Daylights has General Georgio Koskov, played by Jeroen Krabbe, who was another, or Crab, I think, I'm not sure how you say it.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Another kind of legendary villain from 80s 80s movies and a lot of stuff. And License to Kill has Robert Davi, who is a legendary character actor. You would know him if you saw him. He has this kind of pockmarked face, I think, from probably childhood.
Very strong jaw. You would totally know him if you saw him. Yeah.
And he's just your standard issue Miami Vice drug lord. So he's not the most interesting villain to me. Where are you going? It's down to 2 for me immediately.
I mean, I think we're gonna.
For me, it's Kamal Khan, Louis Jourdan versus Christopher Walken's Max Zorin.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to be boring, but I think that's just the truth and the case of it. It's between those two, and I mean, I might have to go Christopher Walken.
Yeah.
He's so.
I agree. Louis Jourdan
wacky.
is just great in
He
the
is great. He's so great.
He's having you can see him having the absolute time of his life. He is hamming it up.
Yes, he's totally
and it's just so much fun to watch him.
Yes.
He's such a sneaky, slithery, oily,
great slithery face
sleazy,
acting on him in that movie, I think. Definitely.
Here's what sells me on Walken, though.
Yeah.
It's that when he's flooding his mind at the end.
Oh, yeah. At the end of the movie. Yeah.
So he's got his own employees are in this mine and they're going to drown.
Yep.
He's killing them by drowning them. But that's not enough for him. No. He grabs an Uzi and he starts mowing them down with a machine gun as they're drowning.
Yeah.
That's cold. That's one of the coldest things I've seen a Bond villain do.
Yeah, it's pretty cold. I mean, he's really, lost his marbles in this. He's like wild in this movie. Maybe not the wildest Christopher Walken can get, but he's really out there doing it.
It's a classic Bond villain, a classic performance by Walken.
He's kind
for
of as
sure.
bad and mad as...
He's fully Walkening it up there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But there's a really fun line in there. I forget who says it. I think it's when James Bond he's meeting with some kind of French guy in the Eiffel Tower restaurant. Mm-hmm. And I think that guy is describing Max Zorin to him. And he's like, he can speak 5 languages with no accent. And you're like, Christopher Walken can speak.
He can't speak English without an accent.
Yeah. So it's just a funny moment when you know how Christopher Walken sounds.
It's so weird.
Yeah.
Okay, Bond girl.
Okay.
Always got to have a good Bond girl.
It's one of the important elements.
For Your Eyes Only has Melina Havelock, who's played by the beautiful Carol Bouquet.
Yes, she's very beautiful. Very long hair. I love her hair.
Yeah. So she's like trying to get revenge on Cristados, the villain, for her parents' murder. So that's how she kind of hooks up with Bond and becomes his ally.
Yep.
Excuse me. Octopussy has Maud Adams.
Yep.
Who I think is the only Bond girl to be a Bond girl or actress to be a Bond girl twice in 2 different parts.
Oh, remind me which.
She's also in Man with the Golden Gun.
Oh, okay.
She's one of the 2. There's like 2 Bond girls.
Yeah,
in
there's
that.
always more than one, but we're talking about the sort of one
in
who
that in
sticks
Man with the
around.
Golden Gun. She's like the secondary Bond girl, and I think her and Roger Moore really hit it off.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's nice.
So
you can tell
she's the title character in this movie. That might be the only time a Bond girl was also the title character. I think so.
Interesting.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of another one. So that really centers her.
Yeah.
She's like a smuggler who also happens to own like a traveling circus.
It's part of her diversified business plan, as she explains.
She has her own like island where she has this army of these Amazons that wear red spandex. It's wild.
It's totally wild.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
View to a Kill has Stacey Sutton, played by the also very beautiful Tanya Roberts.
I mean, they're all beautiful.
Sheena.
Yep.
Tanya Roberts was big in the 80s. She was in Beastmaster and Sheena, and she helped usher many young boys, yours truly included, through puberty.
Well, and you might also, if you don't know any of those films, you would know her from that 70s show, right? Wasn't she?
Yeah, well, or Charlie's Angels.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She's a bit ditzy. Mm-hmm. She's supposedly a geologist and an heiress, and she just kind of gets sucked up into Max Zorin's plans, and she's just kind of often in the way. Living Daylights has Cara Milovi, who's played by Miriam Dabo, who I always remember as the sister of Olivia Dabo
they
from
look almost exactly alike
from the Wonder Years.
Yes,
yeah, she's a cellist who gets embroiled in Bond's mission to kind of protect this Soviet defector, and she's actually a pretty innocent character. As Bond girls go, she has no sort of like agenda of her own that is sneaky.
Right.
Pam Bouvier which is a hilarious name, and is the Bond girl in License to Kill. She's played by Carrie Lowell.
Okay.
She's a CIA agent who helps Bond out. There's actually a better Bond girl. Like the secondary Bond girl in License to Kill is played by a model named Talisa Soto, and she's way more fun than Carrie Lowell's character. So that's an easy 5th place for me.
Yeah, I just don't really remember her, if I'm being honest. So that probably... Yeah.
I have to go Octopussy here easily because Maud Adams, one of the rare age-appropriate Bond girls.
Not unheard of, but yes, quite rare. Yeah.
But like still just beautiful, but she's also like just the most badass of the Bond girls for sure. Yeah, like she's got her own army.
Yep.
And she's in there like fighting in heels at the end, beating the tar out of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, I love Tanya Roberts because for the reasons I mentioned, like she's just one of my childhood crushes, like any Gen X kid.
I mean, she's lovely. Yeah.
But I feel like it's got to be Maud Adams, don't you?
I mean, again, not to be boring, but I totally have to agree. This is the one I've seen the most recently, so it's fresh in my mind. But this, and I've seen it a few times. I realized this time, I'm like, wow, she's pretty cool. I mean, like Octopussy is like kind of badass. She has this crazy business, of smuggling and circuses, and she's got an army, and she's great. Like you say, she's lovely. She can fight in heels. Like, what's not to love? I think she's also my favorite of this era.
Yeah.
I will say, I mean, I would not put her as my favorite, but I do have some affection for Cara Malovi from The Living Daylights, because I like that she's kind of elegant and she's a cellist and all that. But she's nothing compared to Octopussy. So yeah.
So we're on to henchmen.
Yeah.
Every Bond villain has to have a henchman. Mm-hmm. This is like no contest. We don't even have to discuss this, I don't think.
No, I think
but we'll go through them
too.
anyway, since we're kind of working our way through the 80s Bonds.
Yeah,
and we're
let's
probably
at least let people know
reminding a lot of people, so we'll let them
who
know.
these are. Yeah.
Yeah, so For Your Eyes Only has Emile Locke. It's played by an actor named Michael Gothard. He's just this, ruthless enforcer. He's interesting because he looks kind of nerdy. He's kind of a nerdy looking.
Oh, he's that guy. Yeah. I often forget.
He suffers an interesting death in that movie.
Right.
That there was a story. So he's in a car on the edge of a mountain or a cliff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Bond comes over and kicks the car over the cliff and just straight up murders him, essentially.
Yeah.
And the story goes that Roger Moore really, really did not want to do this, thought it was beneath Bond, and that Bond was not a murderer, that Bond only killed people in self-defense. And it was
for king and country kind of thing.
It was decided that he should do it as part of that effort to
grit it up a little bit.
After Moonraker.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why he kills that guy.
I mean, it's not like any of us had any sympathy for the guy, but yeah, it is.
No, he's a pretty
Bond
nasty bad guy.
Yeah.
Like he runs, he's like drives a dune buggy and runs a woman down earlier. He's pretty
ruthless. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Octopussy has Govinda, played by Kabir Bedi, who is a fighter, an assassin, wears a turban, has these really intense brown eyes.
Yes,
that's
very intense face. Great face.
He looks like he wants to tear your head off.
He really, really does.
He's, I think, one of the legitimately scarier
that's true.
henchmen.
And you get the sense that he will do whatever this guy says, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's not going to stop. He does have that great, I mean, it's obviously a stuntman, but he has that great fight sequence at the end.
Yeah, he meets an incredible fate at the end.
Octopussy
takes place on the outside. The ending of Octopussy takes place on the outside of an airplane. He and Bond are fighting while gripping the top of an airplane, and they actually did it. It wasn't CGI.
Yeah,
they
you can
didn't
tell.
have that, so
Real.
it was they straight up Tom Cruise style threw a couple actors on top of this airplane.
On top. Mm-hmm.
And they had parachutes under their jackets, but even
Thank
so,
God. Jeez, yeah.
It's wild.
I don't think it was him, the actor.
No, it wasn't the
a
actor. It was two
stuntman,
stuntmen. But even so, just a great demise for your
it's a great
principal henchman.
Yeah.
But not as good as the one in
No.
View to a Kill. Mayday, played by the legendary disco queen / Studio 54 celebrity Grace Jones.
Yeah.
Model
/ icon. Total icon. Yeah.
Yeah. Known nut. Grace Jones.
She's eccentric. She's quite
eccentric to say the least. She plays like Max Zorin's enforcer, who later, when she's betrayed by him in the aforementioned flooding of the caverns, turns against him and has a real amazing exit from the movie where she takes the bomb that he was going to use to set off that earthquake to flood Silicon Valley, and she puts it on one of those railroad cars, those hand carts, and rolls out of the cavern into his line of view. He's looking down from a Zeppelin, and basically gives him a big old bird flip, essentially, and then explodes while laughing maniacally. Yeah, it's great.
Blaze of glory. She's very much in an avenge me kind of blaze of glory mode. It's amazing.
Also has the craziest love scene of any Bond movie. She gets naked and jumps in bed with Roger Moore. These two actors look like they are from different planets. Yeah. And seeing them make out in a bed is just one of the strangest sights. It's like your brain can't quite figure out what it's looking at.
Yeah. Well,
it's such a weird scene.
Yeah. It's But, Grace Jones, amazing.
Yeah. And James
Fantastic.
Bond, he'll
It's
do
all in a
anything.
day's work
Yeah.
for him. So,
Living Daylights has Necros, played by Andreas Wisniewski.
okay.
And to be honest, we saw this in the last 6 months, and I can't even remember what this guy looks like.
I don't really remember what he looks like either. I'm so sorry, Andreas. I don't.
License to Kill, however, has Dario, played by a very young Benicio del Toro.
Very young, yeah. Yeah.
He has some really wild line readings in this movie. I don't know if he was studying under Christopher Walken at the time, but he has the way he pronounces things and the way his choice of like words to emphasize is really strange. But this is, of course, when he was a no name. So I guess he was just trying to make an impression.
Well, and Bond, especially at this time, was a place where you could really be a little bit broad, perhaps.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah.
I don't think we even need to debate this, though. It's obviously Grace Jones.
It's Mayday. It's Grace Jones. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
How about gadgets?
Let's move on to gadgets.
There's a lot of gadgets in all these movies. This was like prime gadget time.
I mean, I assume we're talking
had
about
a lot to do here.
Q gadgets, right?
Yeah, Q gadgets. Mm-hmm. So we just kind of picked out the most prominent gadget from each movie, and I suppose that's debatable, but the one that sort of gets the most sort of emphasis in terms of like how it's used. So in For Your Eyes Only, that's the Identigraph, which is this ancient looking computer that they use to create a composite sketch of the henchman that Bond saw. And this scene lasts forever.
It does last a really long time.
It's like 10 minutes of watching Bond describe this guy while Q punches information into a keyboard. And then at the end, you think you're going to get this like
helpful
this sketch that's going to look exactly like the guy, and it just looks like a cartoon.
Just like a human being, like not even anybody in particular. Yeah.
It barely looks like a human being. It's just this,
right. I just mean that it looks like anybody.
Cartoon caricature, and you're like, really? I think that MI6 needs to invest their budget somewhere else.
You can't identify anybody from it. But I always wonder when I'm seeing something like this, like, how cool did it seem at the time? Did it seem really cool? Like, wow, I can't believe we could maybe do this someday. Or was it kind of like, oh, this is cheesy? Like, I wonder, because I just don't know. We don't have that that view on it. So, yeah.
So in Octopussy, I wrote down the jet. I don't know if that's even really a gadget. Maybe a better one would be the alligator submarine.
Yeah. So by the jet, do you mean the one at the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay.
His little one-man jet, which is badass.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
It's not that weird though. Like,
it's not
I would
weird,
go with the alligator submarine.
That is weird.
He sneaks onto Octopussy's island by traveling inside a fake alligator.
It's amazing.
Yeah. It's pretty wild.
Quite an image. Yeah.
He also has a pin with like
with acid in it.
He's got some fun stuff in Octopussy.
Yeah, he does.
Vito Achille, he has these X-ray glasses that allow him to see through walls, and so he can spy, which I always thought was a legit, like if that could be a real thing, then that's a really great actual gadget for a spy.
Sure.
So many of the things
Literal
that Q gives Bond, you're kind of like, what? And then of course he finds a way to use them.
Yeah, it's always a plot point,
of course,
right,
because
of course.
It wouldn't be, you don't introduce a gun in the first act if you're not going to use it in the third act.
Of
that
course.
old screenwriting rule. But a lot of his gadgets are really goofy. But I feel like the glasses are like a legit great spy.
That would be helpful. Yeah.
Living Daylights, he has a boombox that shoots rockets. So, as I was just mentioning.
Yes.
He also has a thing that actually exists, which is the key ring finder.
Yeah,
a signal
for sure,
to find missing keys.
Right.
And that cracks me up because that's a pretty low key gadget. I mean, that you can buy that for $12 on Amazon.
It's an achievable
right now.
Bond gadget for sure. Yeah.
License to Kill, he has like a miniature camera that are inside of binoculars, which is another kind of useful actual spy gadget. And then maybe less so, he has exploding toothpaste.
Oh, yeah.
Which he weirdly uses to like blow up a door so he can escape instead of like, I mean, the way cooler way to use that would be to plant it in the villain's bathroom. right? So the villain's like brushing his teeth and blows his face off. That's way cooler.
Yeah, I don't think James Bond doesn't usually go that gross, though.
So where are you going? The identifying computer, the crocodile submarine, the spy glasses, the boombox rocket launcher,
boombox,
or the exploding toothpaste? Where's your vote?
I mean, I think I have to vote for the crocodile submarine.
Me too.
But that, I mean, let's not forget that jet in Octopussy too. That actually is very cool. Like,
I just wasn't sure if I could classify that as a gadget.
I guess not. But yeah. I mean, what are you going to pick?
But it is awesome.
It's got to be the crocodile submarine.
All right, we got 2 more categories.
What did you pick one? You didn't pick one?
Yeah. It's got to be the sub.
Okay.
Remember when we were watching it and I was like, how did he get that to India? Did he have that in his suitcase? It's a full-size alligator.
I'm the weirdo who wants to see the administrative spin-off of Bond and how this stuff all works. Like, how did they even get this anywhere?
I know obviously he didn't bring it, but Q had to get it there.
Yeah, Q had to get it there somehow. Who knows?
I'm sure they shipped it. Why are we even talking about this? So the villain's lair.
Yes, always fun.
Always a good villain's lair. I hold that the one in Spy Who Loved Me is the best one by far. It's that one,
Which one
out
is that?
at the bottom of the ocean.
Oh, well, that's
it then raises up and
right.
it kind of looks like this big War of the Worlds alien.
Right.
It's like the shape of that. It comes up out of the water. Oh, it's great.
Yes.
But in the 80s, it was, and for your eyes only, it was St. Cyril's Monastery, which is this, looks like a big castle almost.
Yeah,
up
I mean,
at
it's
the
a
top
monastery,
of these,
right?
it's a monastery, but it looks like a castle. It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. Mm-hmm.
It's like kind of like a big medieval fort. Mm-hmm. What's cool about that one is the way Bond infiltrates it. Like he just old school climbs the mountain.
It's very
and they
suspenseful,
show it without music. Like there's no score in that sequence. It's legitimately a really suspenseful.
Yeah, it's very suspenseful,
cool
very tense
scene of him trying to climb this mountain.
Yeah,
and and then he's discovered, and then the henchman tries to kill him on the side of the mountain. And there's some amazing stunts.
Yeah,
like climbing stunts in that scene. Mm-hmm. Octopussy, it's Octopussy's island, her own private island.
Which is in India, I think. I think it's supposed to be in India
also
somewhere.
known as Octopussy's Circus, where she's got her private army of spandex-wearing ladies, Amazons.
Yep.
View to a Kill, it's Mac Zorin's chateau. It's this beautiful house, looks like Downton Abbey.
It looks almost like Versailles. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Really,
yeah. Out in France,
very
just this absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
He's got horses. There's all these horse races in the movie and stables and
lots
stuff.
Of upper class type stuff.
Yeah. The Living Daylights, it's the General Whitaker's estate, which is in Tangier. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty standard issue, kind of mansion / compound. Mm-hmm. License to Kill is the drug dealer's compound in, I think it's the Caribbean. And that's a pretty cool house. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of interesting, it's totally Miami Vice. It looks very much like every major drug lord in Miami Vice had like a really 80s looking mansion, with like a lot of glass and black lacquer.
Yeah, and neon, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just but built into with a bunch of palm trees and kind of like half inside and half outside. Mm-hmm. Those sort of rooms that are just open to the sea. Yeah. So it's a cool house. It's very, very 80s. Mm-hmm. But it wouldn't be the winner for me. Where are you leaning on this one?
I mean, I think I have to go Octopussy again on this one, which seems to be getting a lot of votes from me that I'm a little surprised. But her island's pretty great.
Yeah,
I agree. She owns an island, for heaven's sake. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I would agree. It was between that one and the monastery. In For Your Eyes Only. The monastery
is cool, yeah.
Which is just a very cool,
just because
exposed space, and the way he has to get to it is really cool.
That's true, yeah. I think that's
certainly cooler to see him climb a mountain than it is to see him cruise in an alligator submarine.
That's true. It's definitely more legitimately interesting. Well, maybe not interesting, but tense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, we have the action sequence.
Yeah. Meaning like at the ending sequence?
Not necessarily,
Or just a big
like
action
the peak
piece?
action sequence.
Okay,
Yeah.
whenever it happens, right?
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. Because I don't think these all come at the end.
No, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
some of them are.
So, For Your Eyes Only, we've nominated the ski chase, which I think is the best ski chase in a Bond movie. There are other movies with it. View to a Kill, as we said, opens with a ski chase.
Yes.
But this one, as you might recall, has a lot of twists and turns.
It's very fast paced.
Yeah, and it's set in the Alps in Italy, and it's set at a location where they have all of these Olympic.
Yeah, because they had the Olympics. It's in Cortina.
Yeah. So he goes through the high jump or whatever it's called, the long jump.
Right.
So he goes off that ramp. He goes into the why am I blanking
luge
on
or
the luge?
Maybe not
the
luge.
track.
The whatever the other one, bobsled. That's it.
Yeah, he goes into the bobsled track on skis.
Yeah,
which is really crazy.
Yeah, it's very.
He goes through a like a mountain chateau. Like he shoots through the tables and tears every piece of food off the table. As
right,
he
of course.
Leaps off the deck. Yeah. All while being chased by dudes on motorcycles going down the side of the mountain at like 1,000 miles an hour on motorcycles. There's just some crazy stunts.
And I remember the motorcycles, like the wheels had spikes on them, which I think that's for the snow, but it's very, it's arresting to see. Like they're pretty scary motorcycles. Yeah.
Octopussy's got some great stuff in it.
Yeah, it does.
So there is the climactic battle, which is kind of set around circus. Like it's like explosions and acrobatics, and it's these Amazon women from Octopussy's army fighting Kamal Khan's henchmen.
Yep.
And Bond and Q come cruising in a hot air balloon. And it's got a lot of wild stuff in it. Bond like goes down a what do you call it, down the stairs? The
the rail,
railing.
the handrail. Mm-hmm.
Shoots the end off it before it can hit him in between the legs.
Yes.
Yeah, it's got a lot of fun kind of grace notes. I mean, Octopussy also has that airplane sequence that opens the movie that we were talking about, which is just crazy.
Really incredible.
It also has some great stuff on a train. There's a great fight on the top of and the side of a train.
Circus train. Yeah.
So I don't even know what I would choose as kind of like the peak action sequence from that.
I know. And Bond is always great on a train, right? You always love to see a train sequence in Bond. So yeah, it's packed.
Yeah. I guess the train maybe would be my pick just because there's a lot of great.
Out of Octopussy. Yeah. It's good.
View to a Kill. There's a huge scene on a fire truck. Chasing,
San Francisco.
Going around San Francisco.
Yeah.
There's a bananas scene at the top of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
Where they put actual stuntmen at the top of the Golden Gate Bridge and had them duke it out. It's great. It's really great. Like pre-CGI, they used to just do this stuff.
I mean, it's similarly astonishing as that plane sequence we were talking about from Octopussy, where there's clearly two stuntmen on the top of a plane fighting. They're on the top of a bridge fighting, and then the Golden Gate Bridge. It's wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
But I also love the scene in Paris where he's chasing Grace Jones up to the top, and then she jumps off the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
And
that's really good.
Basically base jumps.
Yeah.
And he continues chasing her. He leaps onto the top of an elevator.
Yeah.
Rides it to the bottom, steals a car, and then she's still cruising down.
That's right.
With her in her parachute. He's keeping an eye on her. And he keeps running into things that keep tearing off pieces of this car.
That's right.
But he keeps going. Yeah. So by the time he's done with the chase, he's in like
front of a
car that's literally like half a car and it has no roof. Yeah. There's a great stunt in here that I've never seen anybody else do. It's amazing. Where he jumps the car and it drives along for a moment, drives along the top of a double-decker bus and then drives off the front of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like as good as the jump I was talking about from Man with the Golden Gun. It's one of those things you're looking at and you're like, how
did they do this? Yeah.
Did they do that? So it's great. So I don't even know. I guess I would pick the Golden Gate Bridge still though, because it's just some of the shots from up there are just so crazy. And the idea of running a balloon into the top of the Golden Gate Bridge is just something you would only get out of a Bond movie.
This is why Max Zorin is the craziest.
Yeah.
Yep.
Living Daylights, it's probably the fight on the cargo net hanging off the back of the cargo plane.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Although I do love them going down the side of the mountain.
I mean, that's my
in
favorite
the cello
moment.
case.
Yeah, of the Living Daylights. Yeah.
Yeah.
They right. It's Bond and the Bond girl sledding down a hill in a cello case.
Yeah. License to Kill has some crazy stuff in a plane at the beginning, but the big scene is probably this chase with these tanker trucks at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
I guess it was done in Key West. And
I mean, most of that movie there aren't as many locations. It feels like, maybe I'm wrong. It feels like there aren't as many locations in that movie.
Yeah, it's all, the whole
there
movie's
are.
Caribbean, basically.
Yeah, which is not, I like being taken around the world in a Bond movie. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your vote here?
Boy, this is tough. I really do love that circus battle in Octopussy quite a bit. Yeah, it's really between that and the stuff in A View to a Kill. They both have really good stuff. I guess I'm going to go circus battle.
Circus
Octopussy.
battle.
Yeah, I just like it.
So for me, it comes down to the ski chase in For Your Eyes Only. We didn't even mention, but the stuff on the side of the mountain at the end of For Your Eyes Only is freaking great.
Yeah.
It's really, really good.
Yeah.
Like there's a scene where he's essentially fighting this henchman and they're both hanging off the side of the mountain, and you can tell that they just put stuntmen up there and had them go at it, and there are moments where they fall and the rope catches them and they're just dangling 1,000 feet in the air in midair. It's
a lot of rock climbing stunts.
Yeah,
For Your
it's
Eyes
great
Only.
stuff.
It is good stuff. Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it's between that ski chase through all the Olympic events and the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
I think.
I mean, it's really hard. You know, you hate to choose one in this case, I think, because these really are some amazing set pieces, all of them. They're great.
All right. Well, we'll give them each a point.
Okay.
So you went Octopussy. Is that what you went?
Yeah. I'll go
Okay.
that. Yeah.
I'm gonna give For Your Eyes Only some love because we haven't picked it for anything.
Yeah, sure. They're great sequences. I love all that
Up to
rock
this
climbing
point,
stuff. Yeah.
everything we've crowned has been either Octopussy or View to a Kill.
Yeah.
Nothing for Dalton.
I'm sorry to say that. I mean, it's also been longer since I've seen those two, so I don't know if that's part of I'm just not remembering it as well. But
No, they're not as good.
Yeah.
They're just not as good.
Yeah.
I don't think. I'm sure there are people at home going, "You guys are crazy," but you have to like the breed of Bond that we happen to enjoy.
Well, I just also I don't know. I think there isn't as much love for the Daltons, so I think that's not unusual.
All right, so I'm going to tally up here.
Okay.
What do we got? It's going to be View to a Kill versus Octopussy. So
That's what it sounds like. Yeah.
plot goes to View.
Okay.
Pre-credits goes to Octopussy. Song goes to View. Villain goes to View. Bond girl goes to Octopussy. Henchman goes to View.
Yeah.
Gadget goes to Octopussy. Lair goes to Octopussy. And because you gave it a vote, oh man, that was the deciding factor at the end of there.
Oh, wow.
Because you gave it the action sequence at the end. Octopussy has 5. View to a Kill only has 4. Had I gone with, maybe I should have gone with maybe I'm crazy. Nothing's better than the top of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
All right, I'm changing my vote. Okay. That way it makes it a clean tie.
Wow, we've got a tie.
Between View to a Kill and Octopussy. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Can you think of another category that we didn't think of that would allow us to do a tiebreaker?
Oh, I can't really. No, I don't know. Can you? Can you think of another?
Not really. I mean, I don't know the screenplays well enough to say like the quip.
Oh, like the Bondisms.
So maybe a quip. Yeah.
that would have
or
been
maybe
fun.
like best use of James Bond.
Oh, that's a good one.
Or maybe like best appearance of Bond, like entry into the film, like when you first see him.
Right, when you first see him.
Or maybe best like lifestyle porn.
Right, best sumptuous
setting.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't do score, right? Like,
no, we didn't.
For Your Eyes Only has a pretty bad score by Bill Conti, and then John Barry comes back for Octopussy, thank God. But
I like the lifestyle idea because that's
Lifestyle
one of the
porn.
reasons you even watch this is like, look at all this sumptuous wonder. Like, it's
Well,
great.
what about this? Which of these movies would you most want to live in?
Yeah. Such a good question. I guess View to a Kill.
Yeah, me too. I was just thinking those chateaus.
Yeah, chateaus,
Those French,
Paris.
like with the
yeah.
all the equestrian
Yeah.
stuff. It's just so
Yeah.
regal and lush and
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Any final thoughts about James Bond?
Well,
I will say overall, I mean, I guess it's just because, again, this is my favorite era of filmmaking, the 80s. And these Octopussy and View to a Kill are probably the Bond movies I've seen more than any. I will say this is like my favorite era of James Bond, which would cause probably most Bond fans to lose their minds. But but it is. I just think these movies were so fun. These Roger Moore movies. Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, Octopussy, View to a Kill.
yeah. I mean, I guess my thing is like, I think it's just, I realize Bond in general has its pros and cons. But it's always just fun to watch a Bond movie, like almost no matter what it is. It's always like
They're weirdly
yay.
relaxing.
They are
You can
weirdly
kind of-
relaxing considering
They're
what's
like
going
the
on.
kind of movies you can even just
Yeah.
like throw on in the background while you're
Yeah.
doing something else, like cleaning
Partially
your
because
house or
those-
doing homework or
Right.
whatever, just to like have it. It's a very sort of like, they're comforting in some weird way.
It's like you feel like you're going to be taken care of if you watch a Bond. you know what you're in for.
Bond has you covered.
I don't know, something
He'll
like
never
that.
let you down.
I find I enjoy it. I'm always up for the new one that comes out and or watching an old one. So I don't know. I don't know if that's saying much of anything, but it's so comforting and I enjoy watching it no matter
Is this
what.
a good time for me to work in? Maybe this is a good closer. My anecdote about how I saved James Bond's life.
Oh my gosh, yes, please. This is a good story.
Yeah.
I think it's a good
I don't know
story.
how good a story it is, but it allows me to say that I
You
think I
did.
saved James Bond from potential, well, probably not his life, but
Injury.
maybe some injury.
Yeah, probably. Well, this is a real story.
Yeah. So I was
Yeah.
at the Cannes Film Festival. This was in 2018?
I think it was 2018.
2018, yeah. And Pierce Brosnan's wife, whose name is Keely something. It's not Brosnan. She's a former journalist. She had a documentary about something had to do with the ecology of Hawaii, where they live.
They live there, yeah.
And so she was screening that movie at Cannes, and I went into the screening, and there was no seats. It was toward the very end of the screening. So I wasn't surprised. It was full. So I was standing on the stairs, and then some people came in and just stood in front of me. Like they muscled around and then stepped in front of me. And I was like, that's pretty rude. And it was a guy in a linen suit, like a light linen suit. And as he was moving in front of me, he lost his footing and he started to fall down the stairs backwards. And I caught him. And I put him upright. He didn't even say thank you, by the way. And then we watched the rest of the movie, or the movie ended, and then they're like, let's bring up Keely, whatever her name is, and the producer, Pierce Brosnan. And it was the two of them, and they were the people in front of me, and he was the person I saved from falling down the stairs. It was Pierce
Yep.
Brosnan. I didn't think I realized it was him until, because it was dark.
You were just
Until the
helping
lights
out.
went up.
Yeah.
I was just trying to help a brother out.
Help a fellow human. Yeah.
That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So James Bond might have sprained his ankle or what, who knows what.
yeah,
But,
he could have. I mean, I've fallen downstairs
but I
and
saved him.
I definitely got injured. So yeah.
and that's why, that's how I came to be knighted in 2019. And that's why I'm Sir Dustin
Yes.
now
yeah.
for saving national treasure James Bond.
It's an amazing story.
It is.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And of course, he was in a linen suit. He's James Bond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, he is as good looking in person. He's the best looking Bond. He's like, he's probably like with the exception of Lazenby, he's my least favorite Bond. And I think that's has nothing to do with him and more to do with the movies. I think that were just not that great
you
during
actually
that
really
era.
like Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah, I'm actually a pretty big Pierce Brosnan fan. I love the Thomas Crown Affair, especially.
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
And I was a big Remington Steele fan as a kid. Loved it. He was actually the first autograph I ever had because my parents went to Acapulco and they were shooting a special 2-hour episode of Remington Steele there at the hotel where my parents were staying. And my mom and dad are in the background of a scene.
Oh, wow.
Between him and Stephanie Zimbalist in the lobby.
Right.
You can see them in the background.
Yeah.
And they got his autograph for me. And I just thought it was so cool as a little kid to have, because I had no celebrity autographs. He was the only one I had, was Pierce Brosnan. So,
well, this is wild. You actually
I told him that story at Cannes and we went out for beers. No.
I mean, you have quite a Pierce Brosnan thread in your life. Not only that, but when you and I went to Dublin, he was in the area shooting something,
right.
I believe.
He was in the tiny little suburb that we were staying in.
Yeah.
And the coffee shop that we went to every day,
he was spotted.
He apparently
there
was
many
going
times.
to every day as well.
Yeah,
we kept hoping we would run into him
We
because he was
never
shooting a
did.
movie there.
Yeah.
It was in Dunleary, outside of Dublin. Yeah. Well, I had seen him a day or two earlier at the Cannes Film Festival. At that same festival, just walking down the street.
Yeah, I know. I remember
he was walking
you
100 miles an hour because
Yeah.
I think he didn't want to be bugged
Noticed.
by anybody.
Yeah.
But I was like, holy shit, there goes Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah. So you
It's the kind of thing that happens at Cannes, by the way. You just every day, like every few hours, you see some celebrity just somewhere. And
zipping through.
I was like, oh, that's cool. I saw him. That's probably the only time I'll see him. And then like a day later, I saved him from falling down the stairs.
I don't know if there's something, you and Pierce Brosnan have some kind of connection, it sounds like. Cause
we Irish guys, we're just drawn to each other.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yep.
I have no Bond connections whatsoever. I'm sorry.
Well,
to
you're
say.
you know me, and so
okay. I mean,
you're only a step removed from good old Pierce.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
All right. People have long since turned this off. So let's wrap it up and say thank you for listening. And I hope you. I'm trying to think of some shape. Take it shaken, not stirred.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that the long rewind will return with ... You know, like they do at the end of every James Bond movie.
Yeah.
We'll return.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to The Long Rewind. The program is produced by Dustin Morrow and hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli. If you enjoy the show, please consider hitting the subscribe button, leave us a good review on your podcast app, and tell your friends about the program. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.